I call the honourable member for Lawler.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker. And I rise tonight to speak on the Social Security legislation amendment strengthening the Jobseeker Compliance Framework Bill 2014. And as has already been stated, Labor agrees in principle to the no-show, no-pay principle for appointments contained in this bill. We do, however, have some concerns regarding a number of measures contained within the legislation. Now, Deputy Speaker, yesterday in Melbourne we experienced a wild thunder and lightning storm. In fact, it delayed planes from Melbourne. But on-the-ground commuters faced chaos on the roads and the public transport system. The radio talkback was full of people calling in to say it had taken them an hour to travel 5 kilometres, that it took 2.5 hours to get to work. There was one story of a 4-hour commute. People in Melbourne were sitting in these cars, waiting at the bus stop and the train stations. Some of them were people from Lawler, outer metro workers trying to get to their place of employment. Also sitting in these cars, Acting Deputy Speaker, and waiting on platforms, there would have been job seekers from Lawler. Job seekers that would have been late for their appointments through no fault of their own. Job seekers that currently would be able to make an explanation and hopefully be able to reschedule their appointments. And I listened with interest to the member for Dobell when she talked about the fact that there'd be no penalty as long as prior notice is given, and I wondered how, sitting on a train station or at a bus stop or even in a car on the highway, someone is going to give prior notice for not meeting an appointment. And I suppose the legislators in this place need to always bear in mind personal circumstances and circumstances that we don't think of when we're in Canberra in our offices, not relying on a system or not relying on being able to get to work like those people back in our electorates. But, of course, this legislation means that the impact next year might mean that those job seekers have their payments suspended. So a day like yesterday could mean automatic suspension of payments. Hopefully, common sense would prevail and these payments would be reinstated, but even a short period with no payment means limited money to catch the train or drive the car to the rescheduled appointment. So it is reassuring to hear that the provisions that are already existing within the system will be maintained despite this legislation, but I suppose we'll wait and see how that pans out on the ground. Deputy Speaker, Labor does believe that job seekers need to be assisted to find work, and I believe that most job seekers want that opportunity. They want to work. They value not only the income but the pride in employment. Labor agrees there must be measures in place that require mutual obligation in receiving a support payment while seeking work. In fact, in government we drove policy and reforms to do just that. But being a former teacher and school principal and someone who spent a lot of years working at the senior end of secondary school, I have heard a lot of reluctance. I'll ignore that comment from the member from Herbert and continue. Because your wife's a teacher doesn't make the comment any more forgivable from either her or me, I'm sure. I've heard of the reluctance from students over many years of reluctance to register for Centrelink. So this might be Year 12s finishing school, reluctant to register for Centrelink, often out of pride, that have to be spoken to about the fact that they need to register as a job seeker. But the messages from governments over time and from the community over time is that standing in a queue at Centrelink means that somehow you are a dole bludger, even when we have a system that means they need to register as a job seeker to get support to find a job. And sometimes they're reluctant because they fear the punitive measures that might occur because they've registered. And this can come from family history and family knowledge. Deputy Speaker, I've had frustrated former students outline the efforts they've undertaken to find employment. In fact, as a mother of 3 now adult sons, I've lived some of those frustrations with my children. I've seen their logbooks, of job applications written. And it's not just school leavers, but university graduates. Recently in my electorate, I met with 2 recent university graduates looking for entry-level work, both of whom were looking for entry-level work in the finance sector. And these men, both refugees to this country who had gone on and completed degrees, could sit there and show me their work history, that prior to entering education they had done manual labour, consistently worked, then had found their way to university. They had a situation where they were applying for jobs and being told that they were overqualified. Obviously, they had a degree and they didn't want them to drive a forklift anymore. And they were applying for entry-level jobs and being told that they were underqualified because they didn't have experience. We all know the story. We know how the job market works. But what we have to bear in mind when we legislate is those people and the impact it can have when you are seeking jobs, not getting the interviews you want, not getting the positions you want, not even for menial jobs that 3 years previously you were successful in gaining. And we have to remember the impact that can have on the individual over time. And Deputy Speaker, have I also known young people who disengage from the workforce with no sense of purpose? Of course I have. But it's not like the old days where they could collect payment with no obligation. Those days are long gone. I have equally sat with people over 50 in my electorate office when they have come in with those same logs that they are presenting to Centrelink and those same frustrations. And what worries me about this piece of legislation is that there is not built in it protections for vulnerable job seekers, and I mean vulnerable job seekers. Those people suffering from a mental illness that could in fact have been brought on by this process. You're out there looking for a job every day. For 12 months, it's going to impact on your mental health. For those people who are drug affected, for those people who might be homeless, and in my electorate of Lalor, couch surfing for young people is a serious problem. For those people who have limited English, for those people who may in fact be finding it difficult to find work because the barrier to them finding work is prejudice. And I hear that from various support services locally, where job seekers come back time and time again to people and say, whether it be true or not, that they feel that they are not being successful in getting that position because of their English, because they come from someone else, because and it happens. And I hear from those supporting people with a mental illness. I hear from those supporting the homeless. These services have expressed deep concern for their clients, our most vulnerable job seekers, and their capacity to cope if the government seeks to disadvantage them further. So my issue with this piece of legislation is I want to see some provisions in there that guarantee me that those people won't be further hurt by this legislation. And of course, the Centrelink figures back up those concerns. There were over 13,000 no-show, no-pay penalties to job seekers with known vulnerability indicators in 2013. We know that. And we know that in the current system, there were things in place that would ensure that they had recourse if they missed an appointment. Deputy Speaker, it concerns me. What concerns me most is we get up and we make fine speeches about the impact of mental illness in this chamber and in the chamber upstairs. We wax lyrical about the debilitating impact of depression. We point out the compounding effects of community stigma and a lack of understanding, and then we fail in our legislation to ensure that we don't live what we say. And this is an opportunity, I think, to fix that. Because, of course, it's important. It really is important. In my electorate of Lalor, unemployment in Melbourne's west of which we are part, is at 8.1%. The youth in Melbourne's West, the unemployment levels are at 13%. So it's okay for us to say we've got mutual obligation. It's okay to say that there should be a no show, no pay. But if the jobs aren't there, then we risk punishing people who've been in that system, who are suffering from lack of work, suffering from a lack of opportunity, and we risk putting them into a cycle where we know full well standing in this place that the numbers don't stack up, but we'll put in punitive measures anyway. The Werribee Centrelink, Deputy Speaker, is the busiest in Victoria. I suppose that goes to our youth unemployment. We have job support agencies just about on every corner around my electoral office. We have an enormous number of young people. Unemployment is hard. Seeking employment is hard. And the longer it takes to get that job, the harder that gets. This is being made harder by the attitude of this government in its attitude to creating jobs, that all we have to do is somehow cut spending and jobs will magically be created. I don't believe they will be. Deputy Speaker, on top of that, the government's current policies are driving up the cost of living for families, and they will be having an impact in my electorate. The $7 GP payment is estimated to have, if it comes into being, an $11 million impact on our local economy. Families tightening their budget, tightening their belts, aren't going to spend the way they did. Families are going to not do that carport. They're not going to build that pergola. It's clear what happens in this cycle. People lose jobs. Our unemployment queues will get higher. Our unemployment queues certainly won't get shorter with a contracting local economy. It will all lead to reduced employment opportunities. And I'm concerned mostly about the elements in this piece of legislation, about what happens when job seekers are made to comply with measures that don't actually lead to an outcome. They get disheartened. They will disconnect. They'll stop looking for support. And this and other changes to New Start eligibility and plans to leave under-30s with no support will all work seamlessly to disengage our young people. Aside from the human costs in terms of mental illness, and that'll take us to the health budget, and that's a whole other story, this will mean, I believe, when children start to disengage, young people stop attending, stop applying, stop going to Centrelink to register a job seeker, it will mean that the data for our unemployment will be obfuscated, and then no one will know what's happening out there. These measures are about savings. The budget indicates that because it calculates what they think the savings will be. My conclusion is the government expects to breach a large number of job seekers to achieve this savings. That's my reading of the situation. I'll be happy if someone can demonstrate to me that's not true, and I find that really disheartening. The thought that we could have a government that was consciously planning to save money because people were going to breach this, knowing full well what the implications of those breaches would be long-term for those individuals and for the system, I find that really alarming. So we expect to breach them. And I want to finish on another important point, obviously, and that's about whether or not the JSA should be handed the responsibility of dealing with this compliance issue, given that they don't currently have the skills, and given that if it's the government that wants this done, then it is Centrelink and the department that young people and their families should hold responsible, and not JSAs. For me, that's a solid argument. And I would finish by saying that the irony about the fact that the legislation on this has been late, that the work for the dog coordinators have been late, that in Werribee there is no sign of the Werribee rehabilitation project that we were promised. And I would ask, what's the government's penalty? Where's the compliance here? Do we need a JSA to come into the chamber to hold those of us here to account when we're late and don't show up for a very important appointment? Thank you, Deputy Speaker.